trickling in. Could find a seat and we'll get started here. All right, so thank you all so much for coming out. This is the kickoff meeting for the Township of Teaneck Master Plan. My name is Keenan Hughes. I'm here with my colleague, Spatch Tran. We're from Phillips Price. We have the honor of serving as planning consultants to the township, and we're really excited to initiate this master plan process tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to introduce the master plan process to the community, first and foremost. And really the key objective from our perspective is to begin to get some initial input from all of you here in attendance on land use and planning issues impacting the future of Teaneck that we'll be dealing with in the context of the master plan. And the way this meeting will be structured, and I'll detail a little bit more in just a minute, is that you'll be given an opportunity to share your thoughts and opinions in the context of some breakout discussion groups, which we'll have after this initial presentation. And this input that you provide in that context will help us organize and prioritize our next steps in terms of community input and feedback and stakeholder engagement as part of this initial phase of the master plan. So what we have in store is that Spatch and I have prepared a brief presentation, which will take you through just sort of setting the table on what is a master plan, what are some of the issues that we think we'll be addressing. And then the next phase of tonight's meeting will be breaking out into smaller discussion groups, which will be led by a facilitator. We do have some virtual attendees. They will be basically addressing the same questions that you'll be handling here in person through an online survey and then submitting that at the end of the meeting. And then at the end, we'll be doing a report back in sort of this larger group setting on basically what each of the discussion groups sort of uncovered as part of their discussion period. And then we'll talk a little bit about the takeaways of tonight and our next steps in terms of the process. So I want to start by addressing the question, what is a master plan? Because in my experience, not everyone's familiar with a master plan, which is something that's required for every community in New Jersey under the municipal land use law. And this is a planning board document. So this is a process and a planning board that's overseen or a document that's overseen by the planning board and will ultimately be adopted by the planning board. And it's a policy document to guide land use decision-making in the community for the future. And the first part of the master plan is really a detailed evaluation of existing conditions, basically addressing the question, where are we now? And this will be our focus for the next few months here in terms of gathering and synthesizing data about this community. And that will include a lot of engagement with stakeholders within town. And then ultimately, what this document lays out is a long-range vision for the future of the community and a blueprint for basically how to achieve that. So where do we want to go? What should Teaneck look like in 5, 10, 15 years? And it's going to focus on a range of topics. And typical considerations in a master plan would include things like, what are suitable locations for commercial, housing, mixed-use development for different types of land uses? Where are locations that the township should increase density or seek to limit or further control development? Are there opportunities to enhance open space, recreational facilities, and what are those? We'll look at economic development strategies to expand and enhance the township's non-residential tax base. We'll look at environmental, historic, cultural resources that need conservation, strategies to improve traffic circulation and improve transit services. These are all typical issues that can be addressed in a master plan. I just lay that out just to sort of give you a sense of what we might address as part of this process together. And in terms of the overall timeline, I would say ideally we'd like to have something adopted by the planning board approximately 1 year from now. Although in my experience, sometimes just based on meeting schedules, things of that nature, unexpected delays, we'll say 12 to 18 months in terms of the overall process. The master plan, when adopted, provides recommendations that serve as the basis for zoning regulations and land use policies. So it's a document that informs the council's decision-making on land use matters in town. And it also will factor into the review of development applications that are filed and reviewed by the planning board and the zoning board of adjustment. So I noted that this was a planning board process, and Chairman Bodner of the planning board has worked with council to appoint a master plan steering committee. And the role of this committee will be to work with the consulting team to provide guidance and input throughout this entire process. And I would say with an emphasis on how we can make our best efforts to engage the community. So a lot of focus on outreach strategies to get people's input in this process. The drafting of an overall vision, reviewing goals and objectives that we start to develop, and generally just supporting throughout the entire master plan process. So we'll be meeting with the steering committee on a regular basis throughout this effort and reporting back to the planning board. And tonight, many of the steering committee members will actually be helping us to facilitate the small group discussion. So I want to acknowledge all the, if you could just stand, our steering committee members. We have Chair Bodner, Council Member Belcher, Council Member Goldberg, Council Member Schwartz, Deputy Town Manager Thomas Rowe, Elizabeth Davis, Hildy Dillon, Jacqueline Cates, and then we also anticipate a member of the business community also being appointed at some point. So thank you so much for agreeing to serve and participate in this effort. And this steering committee is really intended to represent different stakeholders in the community. So environmental commission, senior community, we have administration, elected officials, housing, and the business community. But that's not all, right? So we're not clearly representing all of the different viewpoints and stakeholders in the community. And I want to be very clear about the fact that, we intend to formulate a process here that, again, makes our best effort to engage all the different perspectives and stakeholders within town. So the master plan is typically organized into different elements under the municipal land use law. So what's required is a land use element, and that would include, most recently via legislation that was adopted a couple of years ago, what's called a climate change vulnerability assessment, which is basically looking at climate change hazard risk within the township of Teaneck, and how through its planning and zoning policies, some of those issues might be anticipated and addressed. So that'll be part of the land use element. Goals and objectives, that's another required element. Housing, that's required. That's actually already been done. And then there's a number of other optional elements. Ones that we think we'll probably cover would include circulation, community facilities, economic development, historic preservation, perhaps even educational facilities or capital facilities, and recreation and open space is one that's actually been underway for a few years, but maybe wrapped into this process as well. So before we commit to any specific scope in terms of the elements and the issues, we want to get a sense from the community about issues and priorities before we set anything in stone. Teaneck has been pretty active in terms of its master planning in recent years. The last comprehensive master plan was in 2007. This will be the new comprehensive master plan for the community. So that was roughly 16 years ago. In the interim, as required under the municipal land use law, Teaneck has adopted several reexamination reports. So those were done in 2011, 2014, 2017. There's been at least one amendment to the master plan. You have a housing element and fair share plans that have been adopted. And then, as I said, an open space and recreation plan update, which has been drafted as well. and also an environmental resource inventory, which we understand is in process. So at this point, what we'd like to do, and I'm going to have Spatch take us through this portion of the presentation, which is really intended to sort of set the table for tonight's discussion when we break out into groups, by just sharing with you a brief snapshot of some demographic trends and data in the community. And this is something that we're going to really dig into over the next couple of months, but just pointing out some observations in terms of the demographics of the community, housing characteristics, and so forth, that will help sort of, I think, stimulate some discussion later on tonight. So with that, Spatch, you want to take us through these few?
Hi, everyone. Like Keenan said, my name is Spatch Tran, and I'm a planner at Phillips Price. So like Keenan said, we just wanted to look at where the community is now and how it might have changed since the last master plan in 2007. One of the best ways to do this is to look at decennial census data, which is the most accurate. There are interim data points in different years, but we wanted to look at the census data just for the purposes of this meeting tonight. And we started out looking at the overall population of Teaneck. As you can see up on the left chart, the population of Teaneck increased by about 1,500 people from 2010 to 2020. And that's about a 3.5% increase in population. We did compare this to the Bergen County population increase over the same period, and that did have a faster population growth of about 5.5%. So that just kind of helps to see how Teaneck has grown in comparison to maybe some of its neighbors. We also looked at age distribution in the township between 2010 and 2020. Certainly the population is aging. The population of very young children, say 5 and under, has decreased from 2010 to 2020. And you can see that the population over 64, 65 has grown quite a bit and is, you could probably say, the fastest growing group, age group in the township. We also wanted to look at diversity of the township between 2010 and 2020, and also in comparison to Bergen County more recently in 2020. We can see that the population demographics did change slightly. The categories of some other race or 2 or more races increased in Teaneck, while some other groups such as white or Black / African American, those population groups decreased, and Asian population increased slightly. Now, compared to Bergen County, the population is much more diverse in Teaneck across various groups, but specifically the African American or Black group, and it has smaller proportions of white and Asian populations. And I'll also just note that the census does record Hispanic ethnicity, but it's a separate category or question. And that group did increase in Teaneck from 2010 to 2020. And the proportion is about the same in Bergen County as well. So I think that this just shows an asset that Teaneck has, that it is a fairly diverse community, especially compared to some of its neighbors. Next, we also looked at housing characteristics. Just very simplistically, we looked at the proportion of housing units that are owned or rented in Teaneck and also in Bergen County. So the rental housing stock in Teaneck did increase from 2010 to 2020 by about 3.5%. Bergen County as a whole has a greater share of rental housing than Teaneck does. And our next slide will get a little bit more into detail on that. This is the last graphic that we have kind of on background demographics and other characteristics for the community. This is from Age Friendly Teaneck. It's a graphic that they created, and we found it very useful to look at. Just some general indicators that we thought were interesting is that the aging population or the population over 60, as I mentioned, is fairly large and growing. In terms of where they live and how they live, there's some interesting statistics here, and this presentation will be online after it in case you'd like to see this in more detail. I know it's a little small, but 32% of people over 60 live alone, 23% rent their home, and 40% are in the labor force. So those are just some indicators to think about as we craft this master plan. There's also some information here about housing burden in terms of income. So housing burden or cost burden is defined as spending more than 30% of your income on housing. And there is some indicators here that the elderly population may be struggling with that aspect of housing. Also, there are some just general housing statistics in this graphic. It shows that compared to Bergen County, Teaneck has many more single-family units as a proportion of all housing units, whereas Bergen County has more multifamily or duplex style units or even townhouses. And also, they also looked at the number of rooms in a home. That doesn't mean bedrooms, that means rooms, so all types of rooms. And in Teaneck, there were more rooms on average than in Bergen County as a whole in each housing unit. And now I will flip it back to Keenan.
Thank you. So other issues that have emerged, at least since the last master plan in 2007, of course, everything that happened in the course of the pandemic and new and emerging issues as a result of that. Institutional expansion, this has always been something in the Teaneck master plan that has been a planning and zoning issue. You have examples in expansion of Holy Name Medical Center, ongoing applications involving expansions of houses of worship and schools within Teaneck. So of course, those issues will be relevant as part of the master plan process. Within the business districts, changes over time, and in particular, just increased pressure on bricks and mortar retail and more of a shift to services and entertainment as a way to sustain a lot of business districts really across the country at this point. But that's something that will be certainly looked at in the context of the master plan. The affordable housing landscape has changed since 2007, at least in terms of how Teaneck's obligation and the rules and regulations are administered. I think at the end of the day, it's still sort of the same picture in that any residential multifamily development in town still has to include a set aside for affordable housing to low and moderate income units. But another thing that we might consider as part of the master plan is what about what I'll call missing middle housing, which is there may be requirements for low and moderate income housing, but what about folks that are sort of caught in between that demographic in terms of household income and something that's more moderate, affordability issues within the town relative to single family homes, other types of housing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, of course, climate change hazard vulnerability, which is now a required element of the master plan. We also, and I would encourage everyone on the master plan website through the township homepage, you can look at all the existing master plan documentation, but just to give you a sense of where we're headed. In a typical master plan, there's a list of goals, right, that basically are intended to implement whatever vision that we draft as a community in terms of the future of Teaneck. So goals, and then also objectives in terms of how we can achieve that vision. So I'm not going to go over all of these in detail, but it gives you a sense of what was done in the past in Teaneck, and at least in terms of the format, sort of where we're headed as part of a typical master plan. We've also listed here just all of the litany of objectives that have been carried through in the prior master plan documents. So we'll be looking at these, but we want to update them reconsider them as part of this process. And then I would also note in the most recent reexamination of the master plan in 2017, there was, and this is a required aspect of a reexamination, you talk about what the major problems are in town. And this is 6 of those, but those included decline in the non-residential tax rateable base, expansion of institutions, substandard housing stock. There was concern about tear down activity in single-family residential neighborhoods, economic development in retail districts, and outdated zoning. So again, this is just to give you a sense of context for what's been done in the past, and some typical issues that are often considered in a master plan. So we're at the point now where we would like to move into a small group discussion. A couple of things. First of all, there should be a sign-in sheet going around. Okay, terrific. So that's going to make its way around. We'd like you to put in your name and your contact info on that sign-in sheet. We are going to be breaking out into small groups, and just in a moment, Spatch and I are going to have a brief conversation about the numbers that we're seeing and how many different groups that we're going to end up with here. But what's going to happen is that you're going to be assigned to a group with a facilitator. The facilitator is going to have a clipboard with a number on it. We're going to assign you a number. You go with that facilitator to that group. We're going to try to maybe stay in this room if we can. We're going to have to do some rearranging of chairs in order to accommodate this, to break out into groups of roughly 6 to 8 people. Each group discussion will be led by a facilitator from the steering committee, and their role will be to facilitate that discussion and also keep a record of basically, you know, the outcomes of that discussion relative to the questions which I'm about to go through. And then we're going to end the breakout session around 8:20 or so. Spatch and I will be roaming around if we're not facilitating and just trying to remind everyone of where we are on time. In the meantime, all of the virtual attendees will be recording their responses to these questions in an online form that will be submitted at the end of the meeting. And then when we reconvene at 8:20 or 8:30, each facilitator will be reporting back on basically the findings of their group. So we do this often in a master plan process, especially at the kickoff or initiation stage, just to get a sense for what some of the common themes are, what are the hot button issues. So the first question that we'd like you to address is talking a little bit about the strengths of the community. What are the assets of Teaneck? And then secondly, and this is really typical for those of you that familiar with like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. That's kind of what we're doing here. The second question would be talking about what aspects of the community, again, really talking about physical planning issues, need improvement, and what is the biggest challenge Teaneck's going to face in the coming years, and also what would you like to see change. So that's a very substantive discussion right there. That'll probably take a little while. And then thirdly is what is one key topic that the master plan must address. And then finally, who must be included in the master plan? Perhaps folks that are typically unrepresented in a lot of the planning process that happens in town. Who do we really need to be more proactive with in terms of doing engagement and outreach in Teaneck? So with that, where are we on numbers here? Okay, so we're going to do 8 small discussion groups, and we have our facilitators, many from the steering committee. We're going to hand out clipboards to them now. Okay.
Do you want me to open up?
Yes.
You want to bring the mic to her so we can hear it? Keenan, you want to give her the mic so we can hear it?
No, actually, no. That is an excellent question. the facilitators who are members of the steering committee, we've had a conversation about this, and their role is to be an unbiased facilitator. I realize they're from the community. Many are stakeholders in the community, but their job is to really facilitate the discussion here. Yes. Yes, I did introduce myself at the outset. I'm Keenan Hughes. I'm with Phillips Price, and we're the planning consultants to the Township of Teaneck. So we're going to be facilitating the master plan process. Hughes. All right. So now we're going to be splitting up into 8 groups. We're going to count off everyone 1 through 8. The facilitators here, they're going to hold up their clipboard, which has a number on it, 1 through 8. And you're going to go with that facilitator to an area of the room. We're going to work on reconfiguring the chairs. And in a few minutes, we're going to begin the breakout discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
You should too.
Teaneck, can you just tell people, like for the Zoom, that the chat message has the link to the Google Forms in addition to what's on the screen?
Yeah, so folks who are participating virtually, you're going to see a link on your screen via Zoom to click through to get to the survey, which is the same questions that we're going to be discussing here in person. We'd like you to fill out that survey and then submit it when we reconvene with the larger group.
It's also in the chat.
And the link is also in the chat via Zoom. All right, thank you.
Two. Now, okay. 1. Okay, so. You're number 6. Yeah, I'm just saying that. We have diversity. Great school, but are also very, very diverse. Kids are much better. The fact that they graduated from Teaneck High School, they can deal with all types of things. Now we have some.
Terrific. And we're going to go one by one through each of the group. The facilitator, we're asking the facilitators to report back a summary of their discussion. And given the time we have, let's say about 6 to 8 minutes for the report back. I have a sign-up sheet in my hand. If you have not yet signed up, let's send this around one more time. It's important that we get all your contact information. Thank you. I'm going to ask Spatch with Group 8 to start us off here. And the task is to do your best to summarize in 6 to 8 minutes. All right, good for you. And by the way, we're going to be collecting all of the recording sheets at the end of the evening. This is also being recorded. We'll be taking some notes. But with that, Spatch, why don't you kick us off? Go through each of the 4 questions. Yeah, I'll get you another one, actually. The Zoom is back up, yes.
Hi, everyone. So this is Group 8. We had some great discussion. I had the least time to prepare of all of the facilitators to talk to you, so bear with me. But in terms of the greatest assets and strength in Teaneck, the big themes that everyone discussed was that this is a community-based town. It has, people have great ties to one another. It's very community-based. There's a great diversity in people, in housing characteristics, and in cultures in town. People love that. It's close to New York City and its industries, but it has a suburban feel. They talked about institutions like the Rhoda Center being an asset, and Fairleigh Dickinson University also as an asset, though potentially underutilized. They also talked about churches, parks, the farmers market, and all these different things in Teaneck, helping to create community ties and keep people involved with one another. Yeah, all right. The next topic was what needs improvement or change, and what might be the biggest challenges in the next 5 to 10 years. I think one of the things that folks talked about was making sure that Teaneck is not a pass-through town between Hackensack and Englewood, helping people come and stay, bringing vibrancy back to the downtowns. There were concerns related to traffic and congestion, not just in personal vehicles, but also on the buses. I think we talked about ensuring that younger folks and families can stay here. That goes back to the vibrancy piece of things. We also talked about incorporating Fairleigh Dickinson University more into the community, potentially making this more of a, not necessarily college town, but a bit more vibrancy from it. Yeah, a bit more like Rutgers cities. People talked about it getting too crowded in town and wanting to retain a low intensity environment. And we did talk a bit about some social policy that may be better addressed in a different forum, but food insecurity and things like that are important issues that we talked about too. Did I? Mostly. Okay, all right. In terms of one key topic that the master plan must address, in terms of values in the process of creating a master plan, we really talked about communication and transparency as being very important to this process overall. So while that, might not create policy change that we'll recommend in the master plan and affect zoning, certainly it's a part of this process that everybody discussed wanting and being heard and listened to. And we talked about that including connecting to people who are not savvy with technology and things like that. In terms of the key topics that a master plan can address in terms of the physical environment, folks talked about quality of life. That was the big thing. And that encompassed overcrowding and congestion, high rises, the downtown areas, and just intensification of parks in different areas, but really all of those aspects and how they affect quality of life. A Holy Name Medical Center we talked about too, and how to make sure that it is a good healthcare facility, but connects better with the community once again. Right. Okay. And then the last question, who must be included in the master planning process? We talked about younger families who they felt were underrepresented here tonight, and using the schools and PTOs and sports leagues to connect with those people. Also, Fairleigh Dickinson University, both students and representatives from the university, I think, religious groups, and again, we talked about reaching folks that are not tech savvy, potentially through posters at supermarkets, and also just relying on community ties to make sure that people who maybe don't have a cell phone or email can stay informed of what's happening. So yes, okay, all right, that's our group.
All right, thank
All
you.
right.
All right, let's go to group 7.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, thank you. So we had a lot of common themes in our group. So for what are Teaneck's greatest assets and strengths? First, people, the diversity, that it's a progressive artistic community. There was a lot of talk about the parks and open spaces, trees, Someone noted that when you drive through Teaneck on Route 4, there's not a lot of commercial businesses, that it's just green and it's really beautiful. Rich history and many historic sites, small private homes with a suburban feel, cultural institutions, including a lot of nature preserves, the educational system, proportion of single-family homes here versus multifamily. That was primarily the strength that we noted. As far as aspects of life that need improvement, was noted public transportation, both within Teaneck and to other communities and for commuters. Communication to community residents about events and meetings such as this meeting this evening, making sure that, that all residents are communicated to. Revitalization of business districts, pedestrian and bike-friendly streets, and maintaining sidewalks better. Areas where development is planned, one noted that communities around locations or sites where development is planned are sometimes left to deteriorate, or homeowners are, code enforcement are not enforced, building codes are not always enforced. And so homeowners who live in these areas see homes around them not being kept up. Maintaining the character of the community and ensuring that development is smart, that buildings are not too large, too high, too much density. Concerns around increased traffic as new developments are completed. Again, transparency around development and making sure that there's community input into any major decisions that will impact the community. And finally, that parks are more user-friendly with more benches, lighting, shady areas, et cetera, for people of all ages. The one key topic that everyone sort of narrowed in on that the master plan must address is housing and development. And under that, making sure that there's opportunities for community input, that there's transparency around development, that new development is aligned with the town's character, that AINRs are not misused, and that development includes a variety of sizes, price ranges, and that there's affordability. Who must be included in the master planning process? Educational institutions, including the Board of Education, families with school-age children. We know that this group will be included, but making sure that emergency services are such as the fire department and so on are keeping up with and having input into plans and capacity around their capacity. Renters, and someone noted that there used to be rent control guidelines in Teaneck, and maybe having renters have input into rents. Young adults, houses of worship, and neighborhood block associations. And that's it.
Thank you, Group 7. All right, we'll go to Group 6.
Are you sick?
Hey, Group 6. Good evening. Question 1, what are Teaneck's greatest assets and strengths? Without question, diversity was the #1 response our group had. Also, OT Park, the Hackensack River, the fact that Teaneck is a very progressive community, the great schools that we have, the sense of community, something for everyone. Incredible amount of active residents who care about the community, and being able to find a niche due to diversity in the township. Second question, what aspects of life in Teaneck need improvement? Housing affordability, traffic safety, walkability, bikeability. The central business district, specifically Cedar Lane, needs to be revitalized, improvement. Other issues we discussed were flooding in town, specifically in the Bell Avenue area. One of the other responses was the housing needs to be more diverse, multifamily housing needed. Several of our responses were residents that wanted to be less reliant on their motor vehicle, having the ability to walk the town, where the town is safe to walk in. Traffic safety was without question a big concern of our group. Additional ratables are needed. Also democratizing government, encouraging residents to participate in the development. The public needs to be more involved in the development process. Vacancy decontrol was another issue that was brought up. Having rent control so that the rents are not increasing, double-digit increases. Eminent domain was another issue that we discussed, making sure that was not implemented, so one of our residents would not have his house taken from him. And lastly, being heard and listened to and having community input. What is one topic the master plan must address? The Cedar Lane Business District. Again, the improvements and revitalization that are needed in the central business district there. Having consensus on development. One of the recommendations was having a design ordinance like Englewood with design standards. It would be what the town wants to develop, not so much the developer wants to develop. Vehicular traffic concerns over the increased traffic due to development. And actually revitalization of the four central business or the four business districts. And the last question, who must be included in the master planning process? Renters. One of our participants felt that because they're renters, their opinions are not valued as much as homeowners. They don't feel their opinion is valued. One of the recommendations from our group was to have more outreach to the renters, be it hand delivery of letters or by mailers, similar to what was done with the reassessment of the homes. Seniors, they need more representation. Reaching out to prospective buyers, people that may want to come live in Teaneck. One of our participants felt that the northeast section of the township was not well represented. And also store owners. The amount of store owners that are present here tonight, I don't know how many there are, but it was felt that there needs to be more store owner participation in the process. That is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Group 6. All right, where is Group 5?
That it's a diverse, thank you, that it's a diverse community. People stay here. It's not a transient community. Group 5 feels that there is good support for seniors and that the senior center is terrific, the Rhoda Center. This group loves the bucolic, non-urban feel of Teaneck, the trees. It's a quiet residential community with a good school system, especially if your child applies himself and you are involved as a parent. There's a feeling that there's good transportation to the city, lots of cultural assets, mosques, synagogues. The fact that the Muslim community has grown and become more active is something that we considered a real asset to the community. The Teaneck International Film Festival, library, Friends of the Library are among the cultural assets that really make Teaneck special. As far as aspects of life in Teaneck that need improvement, there are too many multifamily dwellings and people, according to this group. And I'll be brutally honest. This group feels that developers have had too much control and traffic must be better managed. People who moved here didn't choose to live in an urban environment. And they hope that development will be more thoughtful and ANIR. I won't use the term that was used, but it's not a nice term, but that's how some people feel that it hasn't been used properly. We need more supermarkets. We're concerned about Cedar Lane, all the business districts, but particularly Cedar Lane. Double parking is allowed and it's very difficult for people to park. And we need more stores that would attract shoppers on the, like a clothing store, a shoe store. On the other hand, the challenge is that people are buying online. And so we understand that for retail, that's a big problem. But those of us who want to shop, want to have stores in our community, we need more restaurants. We all miss diners. And there was a strong feeling that we don't want 350 more apartments in the Stop and Shop area. We need more housing for people with disabilities. And that's a group that isn't thought of often enough. There's a recognition that we need to compromise, that we don't want a gigantic building effort, but there has to be some place, the missing middle, for seniors or younger people who want to move to town and can't afford to buy a single family home. There should be a place for them in Teaneck. So we may not be able to keep our low density and have these people here, or places for seniors to go. I moved to another town when there was no place to go. How many multifamily dwellings are enough? The master plan should provide some kind of a cap. One key topic that the master plan must address is how to contain overdevelopment. And there are concerns about the township having adequate infrastructure and resources to support the development that's here and maybe coming. Among the groups that must be included in the master planning process, people with disabilities, people of all ethnicities. We didn't feel that there was a great representation of a cross-section of the town here. Renters, the Northeast Block Association, and all block associations, millennials, certainly the business community. And there's a real concern about communication and outreach that's got to be improved around in general in the township, but around this process. There were people who only learned word of mouth from somebody else. They didn't see anything. They didn't read anything. There was nothing in the newspaper about this meeting. And that's a concern, that it not continue that way, that we have to do much more outreach.
Is that it? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Excellent. Thank you, Group 5. Group 4. All right, thank you, Hilly.
Yay, and Jackie, right, I just said, and Jackie's paying, okay. Group 4 was awesome. What are Teaneck's great assets and strengths? A lot of repeats from what we've heard, but people really cherish the green space in our town, that the town is walkable, that there's an abundance of sidewalks, although there are some areas without them, that in general, there are sidewalks to walk on. The diversity of the town, as you heard, I heard the words racial, ethnic, religious diversity, economic diversity, tolerance, and activism. People really care about this community, and they see that as an asset. Transportation to New York City, that we're in close proximity, and that we have many different houses of worship, which brings people to town, and which we're all very proud of. And that our neighborhoods are generally connected and centers of many cultures. So a lot of what we've heard before. Also, that they feel that our recreation and park system is very robust. We have multi-use parks, and they really enjoy using them and appreciate them. So those were assets. Aspects of life that need improvement. What do you see? What do you want to see change? And what might be biggest challenges in the next 5 years? More robust main streets. Predominantly, we talked about Cedar Lane, although we did talk a little bit about Teaneck Road and other places. That there should be perhaps free shuttle service in our town to railroad stations for people to commute to New York, that the bus commute is getting worse. And with more people coming into town, it may get worse. And some people wanted to make it easier to get to those train stations that are very close by to our town. Or plan an open train stop in Teaneck, but the preferred option was to make it easy for people to get to those train stations from our town. A pedestrian cycling plan, that we should have a plan for bike lanes, which would also be important for people of all ages that are biking today. And better transportation within the town from point A to point B so that you don't necessarily have to get in your car. And because there are problems with parking. And that for development that you need a solid parking plan that's aligned with any improvements. They did talk about, the same thing came up about it being difficult for businesses today, that people realize that it's hard to stay open because people are shopping online. So to encourage different types of businesses, places where people can gather, restaurants, think creatively about bringing different types of businesses into town that would be utilized. Some of our parks, although parks were cherished, they said some of our parks, they particularly pointed out Oregon Park, it seems to be neglected. They're not utilized well. They could be. We need pickleball courts. That was, and that our tennis courts could be multi-use for pickleball and tennis. And right now there's just one that has that ability. Also, there was people that felt that we do need more housing, different types of housing, perhaps relax the 2-family home restrictions so that multi-generational families have places to live together. And that would help to relieve some of the concerns about affordable housing for older folks and for some of our people that are growing up but not ready to buy their own places. Let's see, new guidelines for structure so that we talked a lot in the beginning of the beauty of the town, the architecture of our town, the Tudor houses, the brick houses. A lot of people remark how beautiful Teaneck is, but the new structures don't have that beauty and they would like them to mimic the charm of the town. And I think I captured all of that. Okay. One key topic that the master plan must address, housing for the next generation, the types of housing, the architectural design, and it should be affordable with suitable parking. Aligned with that, housing for the next generation, we need to improve our infrastructure for the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of the residents in our group felt that we're not prepared for what's to come. And management of parking in the town, there was a complaint that the merchants in the business districts park in front of their stores all day, and then people can't park where there's easily accessible, walkable to get into those stores. What must be included in the master planning process? This is one thing that did not come up in the other groups yet, and I think it's a really interesting idea, is through our real estate agents, talk to people who are interested in moving here and ask them why they're interested in the town and where the gaps are. Why might they not move here as opposed to other places that they're looking. And also talk to houses of worship and why people chose this town. We have such a diverse religious community that's attracted to the town. So they should be included in our process. Multi-language speakers, I think others talked about this, that we should reach out to people of other cultures that are living in our town. We saw how the demographics are changing. We should do direct outreach to them. And our group talked a lot about it is hard to get people to come to meetings like this, so we should go to them. And that we should go, I know that we have gone to senior centers for other reasons in Teaneck to tell them about services or offer voter information. There's no reason why we can't go to either houses of worship, go to schools and talk to young people about what they're proud about of their town, what they would like to see change. And also go to gathering places where people might be going for other reasons, PTA meetings, things like that. Some people can't come to, a lot of people with young children can't come to meetings like this because they have young families. Renters, that came up before, so I won't repeat why. We all know why. Let's see. I said PTAs, elementary schools. I think that's it.
All
Done.
right, thank you, group 3 or group 4. Now we're on to group 3.
That's group three.
We had a great group. One thing we had in our group, which I think almost every group had, we had about a quarter millennium of Teaneck residency here. Hundreds of years of Teaneck. I'm going to try to skip some of what was discussed that everyone's already mentioned and try to stick with some newer ideas or some that stood out. Okay, as to what are Teaneck's greatest assets and strengths, many which we just heard tonight: accessibility, education, location, a paid fire department was a new one. We had residents who volunteer, the highway, the cohesiveness, the location, the Teaneck Film Festival, the library, Bischoff's, Camp Coos was one that was mentioned as well. The programming, free parking was mentioned, and the farmer's market. Those are just some that were mentioned that were not mentioned before. We mentioned a lot of other ones that everyone has said in their groups as well. What aspects of life in Teaneck need improvement? What would you like to see change? Comments of being a city, pedestrian friendly, tear down and rebuild the business district, the DPW, an incubator program to help businesses and loans. Some districts like DeGraw that needs more love, a tree plan, covering tree and sidewalk damage. The high rises, the preservation zoning, improve transportation, and determine a location for cannabis. Also, one that was not discussed tonight that I didn't hear yet discussed was the train issues. What is one key topic that the master plan must address? One was the preservation and the residential feeling, creating a hub, improving votee, and maintaining what we have. Who must be included in the master plan? Because I think the last group to go, a few that we heard that may not have been spoken that we did not hear. Young families due to the time that we're having this at night. Children themselves was something that maybe to hear from the actual children. Doing this or doing one of these in a school. The Muslim community was underrepresented tonight, as were we felt the Hispanic community and maybe Hispanic community included in this, the newer residents of town. As mentioned, I'm here for almost 30 years and I was one of the younger people with my servings here. And I mean, not age, meaning how long I've lived here. So we really are missing anyone that's, and if I could just interrupt, how many people have been living here under 5 years? I think that's the point. So handicap. Hear from the handicap, hear from the full town staff, not just the senior town staff, but the people on the streets who are picking up our garbage and the recycling DPW guys. Notification of future meetings to keep on pushing on that. Suggestion was a robocall. We know there's pros and cons to that, but that was a suggestion. A bigger space. FDU, involve FDU in this. And I think that's what we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, group 3. All right, we have 2 groups remaining. If we're up to group 2. Group 2 here. Okay, and if you could focus really on the
new stuff.
the new stuff, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so the new stuff that wasn't mentioned for some of the greatest assets and strengths are our history, our charm and trees. I think maybe trees were mentioned, but nobody mentioned history. So history. All right. So what aspects of life in Teaneck need improvement? What would you like to see changed? Biggest challenges in the next 5 to 10 years? That wasn't mentioned. So we talked a lot about businesses and making sure that we're supporting our businesses, making sure that we, have opportunity for them to really grow and flourish. Was mentioned that low-rise apartments might be okay as long as proper setbacks are there. That wasn't mentioned. And we focused a lot about aging in place in Teaneck, for our seniors and making sure that there's housing for Teaneck seniors to age in place. The empty nesters. Also making sure that the 4 quadrants of Teaneck are connected, whether that's through bridges, walking bridges, our infrastructure in place. Again, a lot of the stuff that was already mentioned. Key topics that the master plan should address. Crime was mentioned. We weren't sure what the current crime rate in comparison to the last master plan was. Zoning protection for multifamily houses in single-family resident areas, adherence to design, whether that's building material and height. Again, business climate and making it easier for businesses to improve. Transit-oriented design is something that we talked about, and also open space and parks that need upgrades. The rec department also. And then for who must be included, we talked also about parents with young children, maybe having afternoon or morning meetings as well. Business owners, also youth, whether it's high school children, FDU children, school-age children, renters, young families specifically. So whether they're living in the apartments, how do we get them to stay and making sure that they're included and as stakeholders? People who work in Teaneck but don't necessarily live in Teaneck. And our police, fire, and DPW specifically was stressed as well. And then a lot of what everyone else said as well. So.
All right, thank you, group 2. And finally, group 1. All right.
Hasn't been said, and a lot has already been said. Okay,
Here you go.
okay, so we talked about the greatest assets and strengths. Someone mentioned that Teaneck has good bones. That we have great sidewalks. It's a beautiful looking town. It's a well-kept town. It's very safe. Some other things were, we have a respect and appreciation for arts and culture. We have good schools, and we have good public service, that we don't have shared services. The fact that we have our own fire department, police, et cetera. Asset also, of course, hospital and the university and hotels. Okay, next we talked about what would you like to see change, or what aspects of life in Teaneck needs improvement? We talked about our economic base. We need to update our business districts. Of course, we talked about housing affordability was huge. Diversity in housing stock, and that there is a need for middle income housing, that we have the, affordable housing. We have those that are able to afford market rate. But what about our young people and our seniors? That was a common theme. What would you like to see change? Develop the parks beyond Votee Park. Create walking paths for other parts. Recreation not for the youth, not just for the young people and children, but for the aging. Improve senior services programs. Mixed use housing on Main Street, that came up a lot. More fire stations. And alternate transportation in terms of shuttle buses to connect the 4 business districts. And someone even mentioned park and ride. A park and ride scenario similar to what we have, like going into where all the buses would culminate and people could park their cars and go from there. Okay, now let me just mention some of the areas of concerns over the next 5 to 10 years. Social isolation was brought up. the concern of seniors and just the disabled being socially isolated. And that came up in the slide where it talked about 30% of people being kind of like on their own. So that was a concern. What will the town physically look like in 5 to 10 years? Is it more suburban or is it more urban? Managing traffic, the cost of living, draining and flooding. So we talked a little bit about that. And also in terms of, just in general, how we can approach that. What's the one topic of the master plan that we must address? Drainage and flooding, maintaining the character, quality of life, establishing a design standard. Just want to cover what we haven't covered. Respect for private property rights, incentivizing commercial property owners to develop. That came up quite a bit. Looking at public, private partnerships. Okay, and then lastly, who should be, I think, who should be a part of the master plan development? Residents, business owners, and a cross-section of the community, people from different neighborhoods, Northeast, and so forth. And the last thing was mentioned that until the master plan is completed, it was suggested that a moratorium on development and variances be considered.
Okay, thank you. All right, just a couple of concluding remarks here. I think, well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone again for coming out and participating in this process. Let me just tell you a little bit about next steps. So we're going to take everything that we learned tonight. We need all the recording sheets from the facilitators. Our next step in terms of this meeting is to prepare a summary memo of this meeting, working with the steering committee, which we'll post on the website. Here on the screen is the address for the master plan website, which we'll be enhancing over the next few weeks. I think to me, and in hearing the report back, obviously there's a lot of common themes. There's a lot of great ideas, but what really stands out is just the process and how we can make the process better and enhance it. And so we're going to be working with the steering committee in our next meeting when we reconvene to lay out next steps in terms of our engagement process with the community. We're listening this evening. Obviously, we understand not everyone can come out to a weeknight meeting, right? That's not for everyone, certainly in person. And we want to do our best to cover all the bases in terms of outreach and be very proactive. So we'll be working with the steering committee on that. I would ask if you have any questions or comments as a follow-up to this meeting or during the course of the process. We've set up an email address, masterplan@teanecknj.gov, where you can email those. There also will be a place on the website where you can sign up for updates about upcoming meetings, documents that are being posted to the website and all of that. And then over the summer, in addition to our additional meetings and outreach, we'll be doing a community-wide survey as well. So with that, again, I just want to thank everyone. I want to be respectful of your time. We're a few minutes over, but I hope everyone had a rewarding evening. I certainly did. So thank you.